Dr. Shashi Tharoor needs no introduction. He is a versatile orator and writer. As we know, he can handle any subjects under the sun with authority and proficiency. A man indispensable for current media. I invite Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Honorable MP, for the keynote address.
Thank you very much. I must say it's a pleasure to be with you all. The Most Reverend Joseph Kalati Parambil, Archbishop of Virupalli, good to see you, Your Grace. Right Reverend Dr. Salvador Lobo, Chairman of the CBCI's Office of Social Communication. Right Reverend Dr. Joseph Kareel, the Bishop of Cochin. The Right Reverend Dr. Father Stanley Koichira, National President. Father Rafi Kotumkal, the Kerala State President. Fathers from all over the country, I've had the pleasure of shaking all of your hands, I think, this morning. Members of the media, friends, I hope that covers everybody. Ellavarikkum ende vinithamaya namaskaram, as we say here. I must say, for Your Grace, I was so pleased to see all the efficient organization and announcements going on, because I couldn't help remembering the story of a similar church gathering where the Archbishop was coming, not this Archbishop, I assure you, but an Archbishop, I think, who struck some terror into the hearts of many of the priests. And at that time, the father who was to do the announcement suddenly fell ill, and somebody else had to be drafted in to announce the bishop coming on stage and all the speakers, just as you heard today. So the fellow was told by the anxious president of the function, so when the Archbishop comes, remember to say Your Grace. So you can imagine this terrifying Archbishop climbs on the stage and the announcer says, "For what we are about to receive, may the Lord make us truly thankful." I'm sure, Your Grace, that this is a story you can tell in future. But in any case, very happy to be with you all, and it is an honor to be invited to the Cygnus Indian National Assembly. I was told by Father Stanley that many participants couldn't attend, but those of you who have made it, it's good to see you here. And the theme of building human communities through media is a very important theme. In fact, in many ways, it's personally important to me, because in many ways I've considered myself to be a child of the Indian media. My late father, Chandran Tharoor, began his professional career by starting off in the newspaper business from the time that he was barely out of college, representing successively a pair of Indian newspapers in post-war London, and subsequently spent his life in India as a senior advertising executive for some of our country's better-known mastheads. For me, growing up in the India of the 60s and the 70s, his world held the utmost fascination for me, with the stories of editorial meetings and battles between the editorial and advertising departments. I visited the press of the Statesman. I remember the days when the type was still cast by hand, the linotype operators, sometimes their English wasn't too good, so typing mistakes could happen, which is why sub-editors had to be employed to proofread what had been typeset. And it was quite amazing, that whole world now long since disappeared in the digital era. My father used to work for the Statesman, and growing up in Bombay, where he headed the Bombay office, and then in Calcutta, which was the headquarters of the Statesman, I remember I used to enjoy 3 or 4 newspapers in the morning, every morning. Then during the day, the papers from the rest of the country would be flown in, and my father brought them home after work, when I would have a second round of newsprint to digest. So I probably read a minimum of 7 to 8 newspapers a day throughout my childhood in India. And this was not such an onerous task as it might seem, since in those days even the big newspapers were just 12 pages long, and some, in the bad times of newsprint shortages and foreign exchange restrictions, were only 8 pages long. So reading 7 or 8 newspapers, I would not recommend to anyone today, but I was able to do it in those days. So I say this just to say that my childhood has been filled with warm associations with the media at large, and I've been a lifelong advocate of freedom of the press. As the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Public Information and Communications, I had to deal a lot with the world media, and I did not hesitate to push the envelope as someone who spoke up for press freedom, safety of journalists, and related issues. I was very proud that one of my lines on the subject was regularly printed on the desk calendar of the leading international media organization and many others, which was in a speech I said, freedom of the press is the mortar that binds together the bricks of our democracy, and it is also the open window embedded in those bricks. And that ultimately is the justification for why we put up sometimes with the excesses of the press, because they're so indispensable to our democracy. Of course, the spread and scope of the media has changed considerably from the world in which I grew up of the 60s and 70s. Today, we are living in the digital age. All the linotype operators no longer are needed. The presses no longer roll in that way. You can ask one set of editors to both commission the piece by the journalist, approve the piece by the journalist, cut the piece by the journalist, and set it on the computer screen, and then it goes straight to the press, so you don't actually need the whole set of intermediaries. The world has changed in all sorts of ways. But even more important in the digital age today, we are witnessing a democratization of the media space. Today, platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp are no longer restricted to the old original staple ideas of socializing with friends and family, but they're increasingly becoming the first port of call for new coverage, general information, and even daily breaking news often comes first on social media, particularly with the younger generation in particular. And so, with over 200 million users for WhatsApp in India, 241 million Facebook users, close to 28 million active Twitter users, it is no surprise that social media has fastened the pace of change in the media industry's business model, from that of a content publisher to that of a user-generated content facilitator in many ways. Because today's smartphones have made everybody a potential journalist. We're all familiar with the major stories, often of assault and violence, which are filmed on a personal mobile phone and then emerge on our television screens. You see them on our phone when people tweet them or put them on WhatsApp. We are bombarded with these snippets. Just now, while sitting here, I received one of, I received two, in fact, one of a minister demanding that traitors to the nation be shot, and the crowd chanting with him. And this is filmed on somebody's mobile phone, not on a media camera. And the other one was in Mangalore of a protest, where this is not a protest, beg your pardon, a pro-government rally, where some people openly threatened to chop off the heads and hands of Muslims. And that too, somebody filmed on a mobile phone and has put it on social media today. So that's the kind of change we are seeing. If every citizen, therefore, is potentially a journalist, news input, the generation of content, has changed beyond recognition. News is no longer what the media says it is alone. It is what the media says it is, but it's also what you or I can say and make a controversy out of. Now, there are some benefits of the democratization of the media, don't get me wrong. The advent of citizen journalism is not only for controversy and drama, it has been invaluable to our own state, for example, and our society during the crisis situation of the Kerala floods of 2018. Many of you must have been involved in rescuing people, helping people. At the height of those floods in August 2018, official rescue operations were complemented by remarkable efforts on social media. Regular Keralites in Kerala, but outside and around the world, were mapping distress calls, redirecting aid and critical resources to the needy, developing their own private rescue efforts, and often manage to reach people who are missed out by the official search and rescue operations. And we're seeing the benefits again in the way in which the social media becomes an alternative source of disseminating information at a time when, as we all know, the official media has been thoroughly intimidated by the government. The anti-CAA and NRC protests, for example, this is not new. We have seen already how mainstream media can become a force for political change when the Anna Hazare movement and the rallies that he was holding against corruption dominated every television channel for day after day after day, and that saturation coverage helped propel the BJP to power in 2014. So the media has already done it. But today, with the ongoing CAA and NRC protests across the country, which are largely being modestly covered in the mainstream media, we are seeing the social media, the digital media, giving a great amount of attention and space to it. Citizens of our country concerned by these national developments have chosen to bypass regular media by using social media to transmit and share important information regarding the protests. That includes pictures, videos, infographics, requests for critical resources required, information on citizens who have been detained, arrested, people who need legal or medical aid, to fight fake news spread by trolls, invent creative ways to criticize the present ruling dispensation. All this has happened. I can tell you that I was sitting in Kerala, in Trivandrum, when I first saw on social media desperate appeals by students at JNU saying they were beaten up by masked intruders while the police were refusing to intervene. And it's because I got this appeal from a student hiding in JNU from these lathi-wielding assailants that I was able to intervene and ask my All India Professionals Congress in Delhi to go and see the police immediately and try and get involved. I could not have waited for it to become television news. That would have taken a couple of hours. Here, it was instantly happening on social media. And from a first-hand source, not a third-hand report, but a victim, somebody hiding in her hostel, was already issuing messages telling us what was going on. But at the same time, we have to admit that democratization of the media has not been purely positive. It has also resulted in ethical challenges that we must address. The primary one, which I'm sure our journalist friends here will agree, has been the issue of verification of facts, and in its absence, the corollary is the unabashed spread of fake news. Traditionally, whenever a journalist got a tip in the pre-social media era, whether it's from the phone, whether it's from a known source, the journalist would try to work to ascertain its veracity, check whether the tip-off was accurate, clear it with an editor before writing a story. There'd be 2 or 3 levels of fact-checking in those days before an unsubstantiated rumor could actually see the light of print or TV and become news. But the present reality is that stopped happening. Even so-called mainstream media feel pressure to publish whatever is coming up on social media and TV without the traditional recourse to fact-checking. The media is increasingly sourcing news stories directly from the public domain, including from people's Twitter feeds, Facebook posts, and so on. And then individuals can weigh in. Facebook has a like button, Twitter has a retweet function. Comments can be made on all these media. And all this adds other people's voices to the tips and rumors, sending the rumor mill into overdrive without any serious verification of the facts. This is not only about news, it's also about the past. We have a lot of fake history being propagated, often in a vile way, on WhatsApp. And too many people in the country today, their only education seems to be on WhatsApp. We jokingly call it, "Did you learn this at WhatsApp University?" But that's what they say. They say that, for example, that Jawaharlal Nehru was actually a Muslim, or that, I mean, I don't want to repeat any of the vile stories, but on any random week, you can get at least 4 or 5 blatantly false or grossly exaggerated or distorted stories, and unfortunately, people still lap them up. Now, there is a problem with the result of this lack of verification, is that our media has fallen prey to this. In its rush to air the story, the media itself has made the mistake of rushing to judgment. It has too often become a willing accomplice of the motivated leak and the malicious allegation, which journalists today have neither the time nor the inclination to check or to verify. Media trials are common. Media nowadays, when they report a story, they serve not only as the witness, which is the classic role of the media, but they also serve as the jury, the judge, and usually the executioner. The damage is done amongst a blaze of lurid headlines, and if rectification comes at all, which it very rarely does, it comes too feebly, too late to undo the irreparable damage to innocent people's reputations. There's so many lies out there that at the end of the day, all sorts of lies are believed about people merely because the public has seen it in the media. There's also, of course, a culture now of online trolling. You're probably aware of this. Even as more people have access to and can contribute to media, a culture of online trolling and cyberbullying has emerged, which threatens to derail the credibility of media as a whole. These include ordinary citizens who use social media to propagate hatred or push their own dislike for a particular ideology, whilst employing vicious means and dehumanizing vocabulary. This also includes organized groups that have been developed by political forces that seek to delegitimize their opponents and critics through a culture of hatred. And I'll be very blunt with you and say that at least our ruling party has organized 30,000 cyber cells throughout the country with paid people whose only job is to abuse, vilify, and distort other people on social media. It's very sad. And there are also a lot of lewd and obscene posts, particularly targeting women they don't like, liberal women or women saying things in favor of secularism and so on, which really border on hate-mongering. And it's shocking when women are routinely subjected to threats of assault, violence, and even rape openly on social media, usually, of course, by anonymous handles. Since 2014, in fact, the phrase Godi media, Godi is the lap of your person. So they are implying by saying Godi media that the media is sitting in the lap of the government, and they have in many ways, I must say, found an appropriate term to describe those outlets that have compromised on their journalistic integrity to accommodate the views and propagate the official stand of the ruling dispensation, and by extension appease the government of the day. Television is a particular offender, particularly so-called national television channels. TV studios have turned into echo chambers for the government, where hostile shouting matches take place and where routinely vocabulary like anti-national, Deshdrohi, Tukde gang, and so on have been employed, the vocabulary of the government and of the ruling party, employed by television anchors and on-air correspondents who are officially supposed to have the responsibility to be neutral witnesses of social change who are reporting on society. Instead, they have taken sides and become blatant mouthpieces for the government and the ruling party's point of view. So I must say that if we are looking at building human communities, the present situation is a cause for concern. In a democratic country like India, media and journalism provide the necessary information that enables a free citizenry to make the choices of who governs them and how, and ensures that those who govern remain accountable to those who put them there. Governments need a free and professional media to keep themselves honest and efficient. To serve, in a sense, as both a mirror to show society what's going on and a scalpel that a surgery would use to expose a bad wound. But if instead of a mirror or a scalpel we have a blunt axe, then society is not well served. On the contrary, we instead have a situation in the country where a culture of hatred is celebrated, where honest journalists are attacked, where the free press is no longer free, where internet shutdowns are used to clamp down on the voices of dissenting Indians, and where sedition and defamation cases are levied freely. Our communities then will not be healed or united or brought together by the media, but will in fact be separated, estranged, and broken down. So where do we go from here? If our goal is to build human communities through media, we need to rediscover and focus on the utility of media. For our communities to benefit from media, both ordinary citizens and professionals in this space have to recognize that media is not just a profession, but a calling. In the digital age, even as the democratization of the media takes place, we need to understand that with the media comes a social responsibility to ensure that news is distributed in a free, honest, and transparent manner. I apologize, I just felt that if I was in a public place, I would have paused for the azan out of respect. But since we are in a private gathering, and I am assuming none of you is going to go and pray in the mosque, we will continue as has been suggested by the chair. Now that's for the media, but what about ordinary citizens? It seems to me that ordinary citizens can also play an important role in engendering a culture of fact verification and accuracy that the industry currently appears to lack. If we can hold our politicians and businessmen and women to account for the claims and promises they make, which we must do, we must also begin to evaluate journalists and news organizations in the same light. When a mistake is made or false claims are given airtime, when intentionally misleading statements are published or broadcast, society should mandate that the concerned media, whether in a print magazine or a newspaper or social media outlets, accept their error and place retraction statements on record with equal prominence to prevent similar behavior by others in the future. In addition, journalists and content makers themselves should realize the responsibility on their shoulders as agents of change, and should feel empowered by their employers to hold stories until they are confident of the accuracy of the facts and accusations leveled against any individual or entity. The rush to judgment on the basis of partial information, gossip, opinion must stop. Today, there are very serious tools at our disposal. There are fact-checking websites at our disposal. For every postcard news, the Indian equivalent of the notorious American site Breitbart, we now have an alt news. There's SM Hoaxslayer, there's Boom Live. All these are sites that are dedicated towards verifying information, verifying stories for their legitimacy, and debunking vicious and incorrect news forwarded by vested and often malicious interests. Now, you will notice that I'm not advocating censorship or government control. If we go that way, the cure will be worse than the disease. The best antidote to fake news is true news. The best answer to lies is truth. So to conclude, respected fathers, Your Grace, if we can develop the willpower to hold not just the traditional media, but our own fellow citizens and neighbors accountable for the information they propagate and disseminate, society will be better served. But for us to do so, we need to take cognizance of a range of challenges, political, social, and ethical, that are currently holding our media hostage, and work together to ensure that these are collectively and fittingly addressed. If we manage to do so, the media can once again aspire to be a powerful tool that brings our communities together and helps preserve the indispensable role that the fourth estate can play in a democratic society, which is what we cherish about India and hope it will remain. Thank you very much for listening to me. Jai Hind.
Since you are a political person, I believe that I can pose a question with regard to CA and NRC. Sir, I'm a little disappointed the way the principal opposition party has not been able to grab this opportunity. In fact, there is a lot of protests all over the country, but I don't think that Congress, being the principal opposition party, was able to give a direction to it, very especially from the national level. Can I ask this question? Yeah.
Well, I've heard this, and I'm at the same time at a bit of a loss as to how to respond, because certainly myself as an opposition MP, I find I'm doing everything that I can. I have personally inaugurated protest rallies. Tomorrow in Thiruvananthapuram, I'm leading a march, a secular march from Vivekananda statue to Gandhi Park, saying, let us reclaim the India of Vivekananda and Gandhi. In fact, Sri A.K. Antony will be inaugurating that tomorrow afternoon. I have spoken in Parliament. I opposed the introduction of the bill. I spoke against it in Parliament. I've made innumerable speeches throughout the country, given countless interviews. I have done my part. My understanding is that other party leaders similarly have done what they could. What exactly are the public expecting? I don't know. I hear this disappointment all the time. But what more do they want? The actual protests, as you know, are mainly spontaneous. And it's good that they're not organized or hijacked by political parties. The genuineness would go when people, irrespective of their political allegiance or beliefs, have come out on the streets spontaneously. It seems to me that should be applauded rather than branded with a Congress name. In fact, I can tell you I inaugurated a rally of 25,000 people at Raj Bhavan in Trivandrum, organized by something called the Muslim Coordination Council. And we advised them, don't bring the flags of the various Muslim parties. Bring the Indian flag. Make it clear you are here to fight for your rights as citizens of India and not merely to advance Muslim interests as the BJP is trying to demonize you. So I would say that not branding these protests with one party helps the protesters, because the moment, the Congress takes it over, then supporters of other parties which are battling the Congress for space in their own states, Trinamool in Bengal or DMK or NCP or they will all hesitate. Oh, there's a Congress rally, we won't go. Whereas if it is merely ordinary people, everyone wants to support them. So I think, in fact, the fact that the Congress is not super visible is actually an asset in sustaining these political parties. May have run rallies in the past, but very, very rarely has a political party sustained an ongoing protest for the 6-7 weeks that this protest has been going on, because it's ordinary people. People are going cooking for the women of Shaheen Bagh and giving them tea and looking after them because they're their own neighbors. It's not some political rally or a bunch of people who are doing it as a profession. I think that's a good thing, Father, not a bad thing.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shashi. On behalf of Father Philip.
Thanks for your excellent speech.
Thanks, Father. Where are you from?
I am Father Philip Sudhakar from Tamil Nadu. It was an excellent speech. And recently in London, you were roaring like a lion in front of the colonizers. You said you have looted our country. That's why we became very poor. That was also a very nice thing. Even now I remembered all your words. To uphold democracy, we need to uphold constitution. But by and large, to larger extent, governments, whether Congress or BJP, governments misused, abused media to large extent. Using the Constitution, Article 356, the elected governments got toppled down in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, in many states. So I think that this kind of abusing our Constitution for very many years, the governments are doing the same thing. So I think that this has to be corrected. I don't know how it would be corrected. The culmination point is that we are becoming, we are losing our citizenship. So, what's your answer to this one? This kind of abuse of the governments.
Father, there's a bit of an echo, so I can't swear I heard every word accurately, but if I've understood your question correctly, you're saying that all governments in this country, whether BJP or Congress, have abused the opposition. Is that what you're saying? In past years also there has been...
In the past also, using Article 356, the Nambudiri government in Kerala was toppled down, and Kalaignar DMK government in Tamil Nadu was toppled down. So like that, now 370, using the 370 in Kashmir.
I know what you're saying. In fact, I was a critic of the emergency myself when it happened, and I've written about it at that time and in my later books. So some of the misuse of the central government's powers was extremely unfortunate. But you know, Father, as a priest, that two wrongs never make a right. If somebody did something wrong in the past, for today's government, in supposedly more enlightened times, to just say, okay, we're doing something terrible, but you also did something terrible, is no real answer. I mean, I have an ethical problem with that argument. To my mind, if that was wrong, this is also wrong. And you cannot justify a new wrong by reference to an old one. You know that. There were terrible crimes committed during the Inquisition. Would today you justify torturing somebody who believed something that you didn't agree with? You would not, because we are a few centuries after the days of the Inquisition. We can't think like that, behave like that. Similarly, if the nation, as Mr. Modi keeps saying, has learned deep lessons from the emergency, then why aren't those lessons being applied rather than the excesses being imitated? So my answer is, I think that was indefensible. I think this is also indefensible.
Thank you, Doctor. I think one important thing is to share is maybe Pope John Paul II did a great thing. The mistakes that the church done in the previous years, as he mentioned, the Inquisition, he went around asking pardon to the world. I think this is what every government need to make. Father Idapalli, to your intervention. After that, Suresh.
It is always a great pleasure and enjoyment and excitement to listen to you.
Thank you.
As you referred, there is a kind of reaction all around the country now against the government stand. And the government knows, it seems, that this is going to get subsided after some time. Even though it appears that it is catching all over, slowly they are suppressing it, directly or indirectly, controlling all the media, either through allurement or suppression or attacking them in different other ways, and making all the leadership become silent. As it happened during the demonetization, there was a lot of hue and cry against the government, but after some time it all subsided. There was nothing that people could do. Don't you think that this is also going to be like that, because government seems to be determined, knowing this whole situation, they are determined to suppress it and make it subsequently silent after a little while when people get tired of. Is there any way?
Father, you're totally right. And there's one more factor you haven't mentioned, which is that the next general elections, which is the next opportunity for the protesters to topple the government, is more than 4 years away, 4.5 years almost. So in those circumstances, the government is very confident that they can outlast the protesters. Many of the protesters have pinned their hopes on the Supreme Court, that maybe the Supreme Court case will find the government's law to be unconstitutional, and then, of course, the protesters can wrap up and go. There is a sort of more simple Gandhian way of ending the protests, which is for Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah to say, there will be no intention of actually passing an NRC or conducting an NPR to identify those of dubious citizenship. You know what happened was, they issued rules for the NPR, the National Population Register, which are different from the rules undertaken when the same exercise was supposed to be conducted in 2010 before the last census. That was merely an exercise to find out where people were living and if they intended to remain in that address. Whereas The other one, the BJP's one, says you can ask 8 other questions that were not in the original concept. That includes your Aadhaar number, your passport number, your driving license number, your parents' names, dates of birth and places of birth. All of this is very troubling, and it's made more troubling by the rule saying that the enumerator will note against certain names dubious citizenship, and those people will be subjected to a further inquiry. Now, if these rules are cancelled, it'll be a different matter. But as long as these rules exist, I think civil unrest is inevitable, because you're talking about the government going from door to door, ostensibly for a neutral exercise of doing a register of the population, but asking questions that can be used to disenfranchise Indian citizens. And there the CAA is a very clear signal. The CAA signals that people of certain faiths, at this stage anyway, get a free pass, but people who are Muslim will be the ones subjected to further scrutiny on the presumption that they might be illegal immigrants, and many of them may well find their voting cards taken away, their job, their rights to work in this country taken away, and so on. So it is a very worrying, serious problem.
Father Suresh.
I'm Father Suresh, the chief editor of Indian Currents Weekly. This is a magazine started by the CBCI, and this is the only magazine that has taken on Modi for the last 6 years head on. And you mentioned about Godi media. We speak about modified media, M-O-D-I in capital, modified media. Now my question to you, we listened to you for 20 minutes. You have a national newspaper, National Herald. How come that the Congress has failed to exploit the existence of National Herald? Or do you think that there is a vacuum or leadership vacuum in the Congress that has resulted in this scenario?
Look, the National Herald ceased print publication on a daily basis because it was losing too much money. You see, the economics of newspapers are twofold. One is purchases and subscriptions by readers, and the second is advertising. Advertising is often linked to readership, because if you are read by few people, then people don't want to place their ads with you. If you are read by lots of people, then you get more ads. That's the way it works. So in those circumstances, what happened to the National Herald was it became unaffordable to print. So they're running the National Herald as a online web paper, and they're printing 1 issue a week on Sunday. That's it. It's not a bad paper. It's well researched. It follows high standards. It's well laid out, and it's very critical of the government. But the truth is that it doesn't have enough of a circulation to be an economically viable publication. In the case of Indian Currents, I don't know what your numbers are, but I'm sure that commercial motives are not there. You just want to have a publication that can reach all your members and go out to all the parishes in the country and so on. And for that purpose, the CBCI will be willing to spend the money. Whereas in a newspaper, if the newspaper is not sustaining, self-sustaining, it becomes difficult to maintain it. So that's the real answer. In any case, the BJP have still gone after the National Herald and the Congress. There is a court case that may drag on for years. That's also part of our developments in this country, is the utilization of the courts to actually harass and persecute people. And that's something which is a different subject. We're not here to talk about that, but it's one more manifestation is in the National Herald case.
Thank you. Mr. Verghese, before that we will have one more take. Okay? Maybe Father Jacob. That's the end of it.
Dr. Tharoor, sure, Verghese. This is Verghese from Indian Catholic Matters, and I'm from Bangalore. You touched upon the safety of journalists, and more so on fake news and good news. And I, as a journalist who's seen from traditional media to digital space now, the challenge is for us to chase bad content with good content. And even so, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't do. The point is, where is media heading to in a situation like this?
Sorry, where is?
Where is media heading to in a situation like
Well,
this?
that's exactly the theme of my speech, sir. If you listen to the last 5-10 minutes, what I was saying was precisely that the media is in that position, and that ultimately we need to in many ways change the culture, both of the mainstream media and of social media, where we ourselves are in many ways responsible. Because we ourselves are issuing tweets and posts and Facebook postings and web pages, and our views are the views of you and me and our next door neighbor. These are not professionally vetted or fact-checked or researched media stories. So the answer really lies in making a strong effort publicly to promote a culture of fact-checking, of verification, of tolerance, etc., which sadly is very, very difficult to ensure. Now that digital space is getting to be more sophisticated, perhaps, for example, every single posting or tweet that makes a claim can automatically link to a fact-checking site that says, verified or leads you to a correction. I don't know, something like that would need to be done, because increasingly our young people are consuming their news in this way. Many young people are no longer buying a daily newspaper, they're just getting their news from this. And the result is that what news they're getting we can't entirely verify.
Father Jacob.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the wonderful exposition about the media that we had. The question I want to ask is for this CAA and NRC, years ago when Gandhi and the entire India was against the British trying to oust them out of India, Gandhi followed when the Britishers put on us the salt tax, the unjust salt tax. He started on with a disobedient movement, and the entire empire shook on that. The whole masses followed him. And now that we have a democratically elected government, constitutionally passing something in the parliament, but all of us know, at least majority of us know, that it is injustice and it is against the people of the country, especially a section. Today one section, tomorrow another law could come to the next section, anything could happen. It is eating upon our constitution and the fabric of the country. So can't the Congress, the principal opposition party, begin on if at all this is going to be implemented in the country as it is passed already, can there be a mass disobedient movement? Like now people are talking about the hum kagas nahi dikhayenge. So it is a beginning of this can never be implemented if we don't cooperate with the government, something like a non-cooperation movement. Is that an option? I just want.
It is an option at the next stage. That is, if they start an exercise of going door to door asking these questions, that is when we would call for a boycott of the NPR and non-cooperation. And I feel fairly confident that many opposition parties would do this. In fact, some states ruled by opposition parties, including Kerala and Bengal, have already said they will not implement the NPR. See, with the CAA, I have a fundamental objection of principle that you cannot introduce religion as a determinant of citizenship, because that is an assault on the very basis of the freedom struggle. It was Jinnah and the Pakistanis who said that their religion was their identity. The Indian freedom movement said we are freedom for everybody. So that fundamental difference between the two has to be fought for and is worth fighting for. But it is also true that citizenship is a prerogative only of the central government of the day. And that really non-cooperation with CAA actually makes no sense, because nobody here has any rights to grant citizenship or to take away citizenship. It is when we get to the next stage of deciding who is eligible through the NPR exercise that then we will have a very serious opportunity to challenge it. Because the way it works is, you know how the census is conducted. Of course, that's conducted under a different law, the Census Act of 1955. This is conducted under the Citizenship Act. So Citizenship Act and Census Act, the logic is the same. The central government decrees something, but each state government has to implement it. They have to find their state government employees, their school teachers, their public sector employees, and so on, to do the actual work of going from door to door and collecting the information. So, for example, if Kerala and Bengal just say, sorry, we will not implement the NPR, that means they will not deploy their staff to do this. The NPR cannot be done. Then the central government's only recourse would be to demand that the president dismiss these governments and declare president's rule because they're not implementing a central law. But you can imagine that will create a serious crisis in this country, not only a constitutional crisis, but a crisis that could erupt into a conflagration. So I would be hoping and praying the government is not foolish enough to do that, that they would understand that when people are refusing to cooperate, it's for a good reason. But certainly there are, 18 or 19 states that are ruled by BJP party. They will be doing this and they will be marking dubious citizenship. And you can be sure that 99% of the dubious citizenship cases will turn out to be Muslims. Now, 10 years from now, it may be Christians next. You never know. Because the RSS has consistently taken a line that this nation is a Hindu nation and that everybody else is either a guest or an interloper, a burglar, somebody's broken into the house. Who are the guests? M.S. Golwalkar, the longest-serving Secretary General of the RSS from 1940 to 1973, was a Sarsang Chalak. He said that Parsis and Jews are welcome guests. Muslims and Christians are like dacoits who've broken in. Now, so far, they've only gone for the Muslims, because there is no Christian majority country in the neighborhood. There are 3 Muslim majority countries. So xenophobia is an element in this law. Next, if I had to bet and say, follow their teaching, they always say, look at their own words from the last 70, 80, 90 years, and you get a script for what has been happening this year. So similarly, look at those words, you may get a good idea what they intend to do in 5 or 10 years if they remain in power. So let's not take it for granted. I think you're all familiar with the words of Pastor Niemöller talking about Germany and the Nazis, when he said, first they came for the Jews and I did nothing because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the socialists and I did nothing because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the, I've forgotten which the third group was, and I did nothing because I was not that. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. So I think that every Indian citizen of every faith should speak up now, because tomorrow it may be your turn.
Cygnus, Catholic Association. Cygnus, we are Cygnus.